Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the 25th webinar in the Offshore Wind series, Learning from the Experts. I'm Harrison Nesbitt, intern on NYSERDA's Offshore Wind team, and it is my pleasure to be joined today by today's experts, Elena Caja and Beate Hildenbrand, with Ocean Winds and G+, respectively. Before I introduce our speakers, a few reminders for participants and some background on this webinar series. Next slide, please. Firstly, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please contact Michael Ambrewster at the email address on the bottom of this slide. This webinar is being recorded, and the recordings and presentation slides for all webinars in the Learning from the Experts series will be available on NYSERDA's website at the address on this slide. All participants have been muted. We will have time for Q&A following the presentation, so please use the Q&A function to submit your questions for the speakers. Next slide, please. New York State is working to advance the responsible and cost-effective development of at least 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. Offshore wind is a critical component in achieving the state's goals of 70% renewable sources of electricity by 2030 and 100% zero emissions electricity by 2040. While offshore wind has been providing clean energy to other parts of the world for several decades, this industry is brand new to New Yorkers. To provide interested stakeholders and members of the public with accessible, impartial information and opportunities for engagement on specific topics of interest, NYSERDA is hosting this educational webinar series called Learning from the Experts to connect the public with independent experts in key topics in offshore wind. We endeavor to select learning from the experts speakers based on their expertise, not necessarily for an alignment of opinions with NYSERDA or the state of New York. If you would like to suggest a topic or speaker for a future webinar, you can email us at offshore-wind@nyserda.ny.gov. And please stay tuned at the end for a link to our Learning from the Experts one-year anniversary survey. We appreciate your feedback here as we plan future events. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters. Next slide, please. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Elena and Beate. Elena Caja is the Director of Health, Safety, Security, and Environmental Quality at Ocean Winds, or OW, a joint venture between global energy companies ENGIE and EDP Renewables. Elena is an electrical engineer and has an MBA in addition to a master's degree in health and safety. While she started her career in the energy sector, Elena quickly shifted to concentrate on the health and safety side of the industry. She has worked in numerous countries, including China, Spain, and the United States, which has given her an opportunity to become familiar with many cultures and integrate aspects of them into her core values. Beate Hildenbrand is head of Americas for G+, a global offshore wind health and safety organization. G+ is run in partnership with the Energy Institute and is committed to promoting and maintaining the highest possible standards of health and safety throughout the life cycle of offshore wind farms. Beate has an educational background in earth sciences and geography. She started her career as a project manager in atmospheric research and data modeling before working as the technical manager for environment and health at the Energy Institute. Beate joined G+ in 2018 as a manager for offshore wind and was promoted in 2022 to head of G+ Americas, where she stewards the growth of the G+ program and network in the Americas. So thank you all for joining us today, and now over to you, Elena and Beate.
Thank you. Thanks, Harrison, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. Really great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to NYSERDA to present today. While in this first part of this presentation, I would like to focus more general on health and safety in offshore wind and give you an introduction into G+, the Global Offshore Wind Health and Safety Organization, and with our aim to create a safer offshore wind industry. But nevertheless, I would like really to pick up the theme of this webinar, Emergency Response Planning for Offshore Wind, to lead through my presentation. Therefore, on the next slide, please. On the next, here you can see Exercise Sancho, and some of you might have heard about it. Some of you might have been even involved in it and have joined the event online. Exercise Sancho was a complex collaborative exercise between industry, emergency services and regulators with the aim to fully test emergency arrangements in offshore wind. G+ supported this exercise and was happy to be involved and to contribute. Also, this was executed in the UK and was arranged by the MCA in the UK. The processes and outcomes of Exercise Sancho can help drive safety performance all over the global industry. Emergency response incidents are thankfully relatively rare, but also so are the chances to test emergency response strategies and procedures, what obviously brings a risk with itself. The G+ provides guidance to industry in our document on emergency response that includes emergency response plans, and therefore it is vitally important that these emergency response plans and procedures are tested on a regular basis, and therefore these kind of exercises are very, very important. On the next slide, I would really like to give a bit more introduction who we are. Why G+? G+ has a single clear objective, and that is to help to create a healthier global offshore wind industry. And with this, we support the day-to-day health and safety of industry frontline workers by working together with industry on ongoing strategic planning and safe operations. We are a non-profit, members-led organization with a data-led approach. And to get everybody home safe and well every day, this is our main driver. The next slide, I show how we operate. So the key in the work we are doing is really collaborating and communication. And that we do internally and externally. Internally, we work really closely together with our growing global membership. There we share incident data and safety alerts, as well as knowledge and expertise that we turn together with our members into consistent industry good practice guidance. Externally, we collaborate and engage with global stakeholders and take an effort in getting the right people in the room. This is to work together with regulators, policymakers, grid providers, and contractors to really collaborate and to learn together and develop together towards a safe and healthy environment in the offshore wind industry. So who are these members we work together? On the next slide, I put together an overview of our full members. You can see on the top of the list. So these are really lead operators and owners of offshore wind farms, as well as the OEMs, the so-called original equipment manufacturers of wind turbines. So you can see also global operating companies, and with our members, obviously G+ also grew from a firstly Europe focused organization to a global organization with our members operating in the Asian Pacific region as well as in the American regions. On the lower part of the slide, you see our associated members. So with these associated membership, we open up for a wider group, also including developers and investors. And this is really a continuously growing membership. And we are really happy to see, and it's a good sign to attract so many people who wants to join us in our journey for safety in offshore wind. In the next slide, I would like to go more into details of the data-led approach, because I think this is really key in what we do. And what do I mean by this? We collate health and safety incident data and information from all our full members. They have it in their membership agreement to report incident data to the G+, and that are analyzed on a quarterly basis, and they are received on an agreed harmonized format. So this gives us really the unique opportunity to analyze the industry risk profile of offshore wind operations across the whole life cycle of operations around the globe. And the data is really the backbone of the work program we are doing. And information is pivotal for us to provide our members with a holistic view of health and safety performance, but also gives the opportunity to measure improvements and performance within the industry. To go into a little bit more detail of these 4 work programs listed here, I have on the next slide more information on these 4 pillars. So first of all, and I already mentioned the data, we publish data and data reports and share them with the membership, but also with the public to understand the industry risk profile and to identify high risk areas where we need to work together with industry and also subject matter experts to move towards a safer environment. So how do we do this? For example, in the second pillar, you see the good practice guidance. So with these guidelines, we recommend procedures, controls, and ways of working at offshore wind farms. And when these guidelines are referenced in site and company corporate documents, this can be really used as a minimum standard for industry to meet the health and safety expectations. Another third pillar is the Safe by Design program. Also, again, we take the data as the background to identify risks where we see a potential to mitigate the risk from the design stage, so a really early stage. We question if there's an issue with the current design that has potentially failed, and identify the opportunities for making improvements with changing the design. So this is a really wonderful tool for further discussion and research within industry. And the last pillar might be the most important pillar. It's really about sharing data, sharing incidents, getting out of that blaming culture into a sharing culture, because we can all learn from each other. And I think especially the high potential incidents are there to be shared and for others to take precautions to not make the same mistake. So here we collaborate very strongly with the Energy Institute, who run Toolbox, a web application where we gather all the incidents and share to the offshore wind industry, but also wider across all the energy sectors. To dig a little bit deeper into the data, I provide a snapshot on the next slide on our health and safety statistics from 2021. So this is the most recent published report from of the G+ data. This report, like actually every published document, is available freely to access via our website. Here in the data, you can see the key facts and figures. So we analyze data by the phase they happen in. So speaking of the development phase, construction phase, and operation phase in offshore wind. And we highlight the 3 top work processes with the highest number of incidents. So for 2021, very similar to 2020, is lifting procedures, manual handling, and access egress on top of the highest list of the work processes. And also the incident areas where we see most incidents. So these are in 2021 in the turbine, on the vessels, and also the onshore work. So we know these are areas we need and want to focus on with our work. In that donut diagram, you see on the side is the incident consequence. So there you can see that actually 3/4 of the 2021 incidents were hazards, near hits, and first aid injuries. So more or less not very severe injuries, and only the recordable incidents would include medical treatment, restricted and lost work days. Injuries make actually only under 14%. But nevertheless, also those incidents with less severe consequences are very important to us to look into it, in particular when they are high potential incidents. So incidents where nothing severe actually happened, but they have the potential to for life-changing injuries or fatalities. So these we take very seriously, because there we can make a change and we can do something before something more severe happens. In the next slide, we have the time series. Actually, the G+ is collating incidents for over 6 years now, so 2015 to 2021. And you can see that very interesting in the top row, the hours worked in the industry, and you can see the growth of industry on a global scale. So in 2021, we actually, with a high number of worked hours, we have relatively low numbers in incidents. Of course, compared to the last year, yes, they are slightly higher than in 2020. But if you take the hours worked into account, then you see they're relatively stable. What is a good thing, but still a lot to do to get these numbers down. So here you see only the recordable incidents listed. Thankfully, no fatalities. We have the lost workday injuries, restricted workday injuries, and medical treatment injuries. I also listed in brackets the incidents, recordable incidents that ended or needed emergency response and medical evacuation, and you can see it's actually a relatively high number for 2021. In total, we had 106 recordable incidents in 2021, and when you remember from the back slide, there were 700 something incidents in total, so you can see this narrows it down. When we go to the next slide, please. So here you can see on the slide the actually global aspect of the G+ operations. So you can see in the highlighted blue areas, we have the operations in Europe, but also get more and more data from operations in the Asian Pacific region, as well as in the Americas region. And these numbers will go up quite rapidly, as you know, with operations increasing in these areas. So this value of data will really help us to work with industry around the globe. In the donut again, you can see the percentage of emergency response recordable injuries across the years of operations or data gathering of the G+. And you can actually see that the emergency response was needed in the regions of Germany, United Kingdom, Sweden, and Denmark, but also there are more and more incidents coming from Taiwan and the USA, so that makes emergency response procedures necessary. In the next slide, I want to highlight actually the guidance the G+ developed. It was published in 2019, and it's good practice guidance on integrated offshore emergency response, and really lays out emergency response plans and principles for the offshore wind industry on responsibilities and roles and how it all works together for the emergency response incident. At the moment, the G+ is in the process of revising this document to also review the global guidance to see if it's applicable also for the US, and to develop appendixes for the application in the Asian Pacific and US region. With these supplements, the existing guidance, this will provide guidance and information for region country-specific frameworks for emergency response. And the exercise Sancho I introduced earlier is using this guidance document and is testing industry according to this guidance, and to see how this works in practice. But we don't only work on emergency response. As you could see on the data, other areas are identified as well. And therefore, we have a list of work streams in our work program. And on the next slide, I present the current work program of the G+. So we also work on vessels. As you can see, vessels I showed earlier is one area of concern for a high number of incidents. So we do work also with our US group on the management of small service vessels and look into vessel vetting standards. Electrical safety obviously is a big topic, and again for the US we work with industry, with the equipment manufacturers and owners on arc flash labeling, and also to agree on a safe system of work framework. We look into health topics and health issues as well. How can we keep a healthy and physically health and workers and work environment? So we do some physical and medical requirements for offshore wind workforce. We work on lifting, as shown in the data. This is also lifting is a topic of concern. So we look into lifting operations and currently working on case studies on routine, low complexity lifts. Manual handling, where we also work together with industry to communicate better to the workforce how to do the manual handling in the correct way. Personal transfer is a topic we work as is improving safety of steel fabrication, what we saw as a concern in the onshore work. So with this, I hopefully gave a good introduction and overview of the G+ work, what we are doing, how we cooperate with our members. And on the next slide, really, I want to emphasize our aim to work to create a safer and healthier global offshore wind industry. And for that, we really rely on our members, and I'm very, very delighted that Elena, a representative of one of our member company, Ocean Winds, is taking the second part of this webinar and gives us a bit more insight in the operations in Ocean Winds. So thank you very much. And Elena, over to you, please.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you, NYSERDA, for inviting us today. I think this is a very good opportunity for us to present, well, the work that we are being developed right now, and also the interaction with the offshore US market. So thank you also to Bia for co-presenting this webinar with me, and thank you all for attending this webinar today. So if you go to the Ocean Winds slides, please, yeah, next one, I will present you my company, the objectives and the project and the new opportunities that we are working on right now. Then I will tell you something about how we communicate on health and safety, environmental and quality aspects within the company and also externally. I will focus then on emergency response and planning in OW, and I will present as an example an emergency drill conducted at one of our wind farms in Portugal a couple of months ago. So if we start the presentation, in the next slide, I will give you a little more details of my company. So Ocean Winds is a joint venture between ENGIE and EDPR, EDP Renewables. So two of the biggest worldwide players in energy. ENGIE is a French company and EDPR is a Portuguese company. Ocean Winds is based, well, the headquarters are based in Madrid in Spain, but we have offices all over the world. Right now we are around 400 employees and people are coming from 20 different nationalities. The company objectives are, well, this company was created in 2020. It's a young company. So at that moment, we had 1.5 gigawatts of projects under construction and operation and 4 gigawatts of projects under development. At the beginning of this year, we had the same 1.5 gigawatts of projects under construction and operation and almost 10 gigawatts of projects under development. And our target is to get between 5 and 7 gigawatts of projects under construction and operation by the end of 2025, and between 5 and 10 gigawatts of projects under development by that time. So in the next slide, I want to present you our projects and new opportunities. So right now we are working on 14 different projects in 7 different countries. As you can see in the map, we have several projects in the UK in different stages of development. So some of them are under operation, some of them are under construction, and some of them are still under development. In Europe, we also have projects in Belgium, in Poland, in South Korea, a couple of them. In France, we have 2 projects. One is floating with a floating technology, and it's under construction, and the other one is under development. Also in Portugal, this is the one that I'm presenting you later in my presentation. And in the US, right now we are working in 2 big projects. So in the Massachusetts area, we are developing a project called Mayflower. It's more than 2 gigawatts of installed capacity, and right now is under development. And the other one, and you are probably more familiar with this because this our Blue Point wind project is 1.6 megawatts installed capacity, and it comes from the New York auction developed in January this year, at the beginning of this year. And Ocean Wind was awarded with this project after that auction. Also, OW will expand its operation in current markets and in other new markets for us. Like we are now looking for opportunities in many European countries, also in Brazil and Japan, and also in a couple more places in the US, like North Carolina or California. So I have to say that in some of these projects, we work with partners. So we take into account that we not only need to comply with our internal requirements or the local legislation, but we also need to be aligned with those partners or shareholders alignment, so participation. Right now, I'm gonna talk to you about communication, okay? If you go to the next slide, please. So at OW, we think that to have a very strong safety culture, we need to start having like a very well-designed communication program, okay? We need to communicate properly internally and also externally when talking about health and safety, environmental and quality, okay? So the first picture of my slide, the one in at the top of the slide, that is a screenshot of our internal HSEQ SharePoint, okay? So right there, we post all the management system information developed at OW, our procedures, our forms. We also keep monthly reports of our key performance indicators, incident information, incident investigation. We also post or save our safety briefs communicated to the employees or to the project, campaigns developed internally within OW, training, information about training, or training matrix, training modules that you can take. And as you can also information about quality, environmental, or other health topics. But also, as you can see, we have an area dedicated to emergency. So right there, we have our emergency guidelines and the emergency plans done for every single office, project, site, wherever. We also report on emergency cases, emergency drills, and actions implemented after those emergencies. So in this SharePoint, lessons learned, statistics, procedures, and best practices are shared with OW employees and also contractors. That way, we can transfer knowledge from one project to the other or from one country to the other. So you know that OW has started constructing projects in Europe, and now we are transferring our knowledge to the US because we consider that the offshore wind market is not as mature as it is in Europe. So we need to make sure that we transfer our best practices, our lessons learned to that country to, well, make or build a safer projects. So this is something about our internal communication. About external communication, well, we are a member, as Bia mentioned before, we are members of G+. Actively participate in the focal groups in the US, in European focal group and Asia Pacific region focal group as well. I have to say that I'm especially proud of the G+ focal group in the US because we've created a very nice and collaborative area where everybody shares not only their lessons learned or incidents happened or statistics, but also our concerns about how to develop projects in this new US market. We also share campaigns that have been helpful for us in one company. We try to communicate among this group to try to, well, everybody learn from our experience. So if we go to the next slide, please. Focusing on emergency planning and response now in OW, I want to talk about different levels within the organization. So at a corporate level, we have drafted an emergency preparedness and response procedure that you can see on the right corner of the slide. So this procedure establishes how to respond to potential accidents and emergency situations with environmental or health and safety consequences. It also defines how to prevent, reduce, and control impacts that might be linked to them. And it is like a bunch of guidelines for the projects to prepare their own plans, okay? That is the corporate level. If we go to the project or site's emergency or level, we find that they build their own emergency plans according to the OW requirements, also our partners' requirements, and also taking into account local legislation, of course. So with that, we come to an emergency reporting process. So every emergency response or medical evacuation case is reported directly to us. Also, we work on safety moments, safety briefs, lessons learned based on those emergency cases. Also, when the projects or sites conduct their emergency drills, we take actions or improvement actions for us to improve on that area. And we don't only share them internally, but we work with the G+, with the toolbox, which is one of the tools or systems that are developed by the G+. So we try to report details of the emergency cases for them to post it and to have them available for other players in the industry. To finish my presentation, I will tell you a little more about this emergency drill. If you go to next slide, please. Tell you about an emergency drill, an emergency exercise conducted at one of our wind farms in Portugal last June, so this year. So this project, it's called Wind Float Atlantic. It is 25 megawatts, it's a pilot floating wind farm located at Viana do Castelo in Portugal. It's under operation right now. So this first offshore emergency response training exercise was conducted last June, as I mentioned before, and the intention of the emergency exercise was to be an exercise, but also to involve the Portuguese Coast Guard for the first time and for them to be familiar with the technology of this wind farm, with the floater structure. So I thought, when I was preparing this presentation, I thought that this might be helpful for you because at some point in the offshore wind farms in the US, we will need to involve the US Coast Guard as well. And maybe these lessons learned that we took from this exercise can be beneficial for the industry in your country. So the three scenarios that we tried or were defined for that exercise were rescue from floater, so from the turbine structure, then man overboard and rescued from the CTV, from the crew transfer vessel, and abandoned vessel, and then return to the CTV. So as I mentioned, the main goal for this drill was to assess external authorities' capabilities and interaction levels with the O&M team in the project, and to assess mainly CTV crew, so the people who are working in the crew transfer vessel every day, if they are ready in case of an emergency. So the involvement of the Coast Guard, of the Portuguese Coast Guard, was very, very positive, and the exercise was conducted with success. I also have to say that, of course, we had improvements identified and reported, and right now we are working on those improvement actions detected during the drill. Some of them were related to communication or equipment availability, and again, other improvement actions are related to the that the authorities were not familiar with this with the floater itself. So in the next slide, I'm going to tell you a little more about the first exercise, so rescue from floater. You can see some pictures, so you will see the CTV close to the floater. Well, the pictures are very small, but you will probably see the injured person, a dummy, being rescued from the floater to the vessel. So this scenario was aimed to be developed entirely by Coast Guard rescue team, by the Portuguese Coast Guard, which would take charge of all the situation. But as this was the first time they were on site, they were not familiar with floater, so they were helped by the O&M team, the project O&M team that has been working there since the beginning of the operation phase of the project. So O&M teams were able to see the rescue team establishing the injured person, using their stretcher, securing the injured person, and developing actions to move the injured person from the floater to the CTV. So in the next slide, it's a short description of the second exercise. It's man overboard. So this scenario was developed near shore on the river, and the Coast Guard rescue team was on site to monitor actions and on standby in case some assistances were needed from them. 3 O&M technicians were involved in this scenario, and the main goal for this was to assess the CTV equipment and the CTV crew capabilities to rescue from water, a person from water. Okay. And the third scenario is the abandoned CTV, is on the next slide. So this scenario consisted of an old team inside CTV abandoning the CTV through a live rat. They inflated it, they left the CTV, and then they were rescued. So, and you can see some pictures of this third exercise. Again, many actions were taken after the drill, and now we are making sure not only to close the actions open or the improvement actions open, but also to share these lessons within our project. So we are working on the final report and the videos and pictures, and trying and making sure that this information is shared with other projects in Europe and also in our projects in the US, of course. And I think that this can be helpful by you guys there, because at some point we will need to involve the US Coast Guard also. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you have learned a little with us, and please feel free to ask us any questions you may have, or contact us at any time if you still have suggestions or questions for us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bea and Elena. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was a really great comprehensive overview of not only emergency response in the offshore wind industry, but also just health and safety more broadly. I'm wondering if you could speak to or elaborate on what similarities and differences you see in European and US offshore markets.
Yes.
Is it
sorry.
Elena? So yeah, go for you.
No, yeah, well, it's a big question, you know, but the similarities that I found is that everybody is really engaged in order to develop safer projects. I think that most of the industry players who are now developing new projects in the US have kind of experience in other markets. So as I mentioned in my presentation, I think that it's good for us to transfer knowledge from the European or other markets to the US. Okay, well, the differences that I find is that in the US, contractor management is done like a little different because of, well, of course, local legislation and also liability reasons. Okay, so the contractors work differently, and the interaction between the developer and the contractor is different. So we need to focus on that. I also think that that another different thing is that for instance, number of vessels. So the US market is growing very, very fast, and it's a big area. It's a big country, you know, with renewable objectives now, like growing and with the numbers very high. So number of vessels are quite low compared with the vessels that we have working in the offshore industry in Europe now. And I think that those are the main differences that I find. But again, the most important thing is that the safety culture is strong everywhere, you know, and I see that in this business, in particular in offshore wind, everybody is really engaged because the risks are really, really high. And the risks are never identified by us, because at some point we are pretty new in this market. So we are all focused on working safer every day.
Thank you for that. Bea, do you have anything you want to add? Or?
No, really not much to add other than what Elena just said. I think it's great to have the lessons learned from other areas, and I think G+ is great to work together and to share. And it's nice to see also from other regions in the US the openness and willingness to learn from others and experiences. But then obviously you can't just use guidance and apply without really risk assess the specific regional risks. You have to be really careful and to look into regional legislation, regional circumstances, environment, let it be the port environments, let it be the availability of vessels, use of vessels. So I think that's really what you need to be careful, and not just take something that works in one region and to apply it and expect it has the same effect in another region.
Yeah, no, I think that's just spot on, and you pointed that out in your discussion as well when you were discussing the transition from a harming culture to a sharing culture. But there's also a lot of different dynamics in terms of that as you adapt to different cultures and different regulations. We have another question, and this kind of feeds off of the last one of what health and safety issues are being focused on in the U.S. that you're seeing at the moment.
So in the US, like I said, and I go a little bit more global, and Elena, you can add the details. Is really we started actually looking at emergency response and emergency preparedness. That's why this was the first topic we started together with the vessel management. Obviously, in the States, we are in the mainly in the development phase of offshore wind operations. So it's a lot of vessel work, going out for surveys, geophysical services, etc. So this was close to us to see, and now the more data we get, the more we are able to identify the specific risks, health and safety risks for the US. But at the moment, it's really much in relation to or reflects the current phase in the US. Elena, I don't know,
Yes.
you probably have more
Well,
hands-on.
maybe I would add that I am focusing also because, well, we have to think that the stakeholders are different in the US, of course. So the companies involved, the regulators, the organizations. So they are different. So we first need to understand their requirements. Okay, legislation is different, of course. So we need to understand everybody's requirements in order to comply with them. Okay, and I also, again, this is again same answer as for the question before, but I would focus on contractor management. Okay, not because it's worse than in other markets, of course it's not, but it's management of contractors is quite different in the US. So we need to make sure that everything is under control, and we don't pass through a boundary that or a line that we cannot cross. Okay, but we still have this engagement among both parties, like companies and providers and suppliers and contractors. Okay, to work all of us in the same direction. So I would focus on contractor management.
Great, thank you for that. We have another question. An attendee is asking, what were the key lessons learned from the exercise scenarios, and if you can add a little bit more detail on those.
Yes, so some of the actions that I do remember now are related to communications. So when an emergency happens, you need to work really fast. Okay, so we've detected that sometimes the communication between the vessel and the Coast Guard, or the vessel to the O&M team, was not as fast as expected. Okay, or maybe we didn't give the team, the messages were not clearly given to the people involved in the exercise. Okay, also, as I mentioned, a floater, so this float conducting technology, so the base of the turbine, was new for the Coast Guard. I guess that is something new for everybody, even if you are working on this business. So you are not on a platform or on a turbine every day. So they were like stopped, or the process of rescuing the injured person was slowed because they didn't know the structure very much. So we need to work on that, maybe train people on emergency procedure, but right on site, you know, because so learning about a project is not the same when you do it from a paper or on site. Okay, so maybe we have to work more on that. And well, of course, like details, but are important as well. Like we identified a couple of proper use of PPE. So that's like we were concerned about that. And well, this kind of things, you know, but I would say communication and like an unknown of the structure where they were working in.
Yeah, from the exercise Sancho, I mentioned reference in my presentation. There is no, we are still, the report is still coming out, but I think, yes, communication is a thing. And it really shows that these kind of very realistic drills and exercises are very helpful, because, I mean, you can have a standard procedure, a plan in place, but really to action it and then to do it in the right, under pressure, under time pressure, I think that was really clear, that the benefit of having these drills. And really also very good to see, in that case, it was the Maritime Coast Guard Agency in the UK who worked together with the emergency services and the industry, but also US Coast Guard was involved. And I think these services can also learn from each other around the globe. And I think that's really great to see how this plays together. And yeah.
Thank you. No, that's a really great answer, and just I think focusing on communication is so key. We have another question from Ali DeCurdy. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that last name. And they ask, how is the offshore wind industry training or preparing for potential environmental disasters? They're wondering if there are any regulations for U.S. industry to work or train with the Coast Guard, for example, like an oil spill, emergency response management systems, and if environmental responders for marine mammal or sea turtle stranding organizations will be brought into this process. So sort of asking, I guess, on a kind of a holistic level, not
Yeah.
people, but
Okay, so I can start and then you, Bia, can add something. So I am seeing recently that the countries or the organizations that open tender processes or bidding processes to participate or to win rights to develop a wind farm are being more and more restricted when talking about environmental. So they are they expect the developers to present initiatives, programs, whatever you have in place in order to avoid these emergency catastrophes or incidents. Okay, so I think that we are all being more like careful with this kind of incidents or environmental activities. So, but not only because we are requested to do so by the well, the organizations of or the bidding processes and so on, but it's also because we believe that that's a danger or a risk that there is in our business, in the offshore business, and we don't want that to happen. So I think that environmental is taking more and more weight in this industry, not just in the US, of course, but I mean in every country.
Yes, and I can only add, obviously, VG Plus, we focus on health and safety, not on the environment, but that doesn't mean that the industry is not focusing on the environmental impact as well. And I mean, obviously, you operate with vessels, and probably the biggest spills come from the vessel. If something happens, and there are in the ICS in the US, it's covered, so it's in the procedures, and there are procedures. These exercises we both presented were focusing on health and safety, but I'm not sure, Elena, but I'm pretty sure there are environmental aspects as well. I know we work closely with the International Maritime Contractor Association, IMCA, who focus on really the vessel operations, etc. So there it's looked into it as well.
Yes, so we are developing the strong environmental operations procedures and programs, and we also make sure that all the environmental incidents are properly reported. Okay, and we are focusing on those kind of incidents a lot because we think that we can learn a lot from them. Even if they are minor spills, you know, you always can learn from them and put control measures in place in order to avoid them to happen again. So, and sharing those lessons learned among the projects will help us to to control the risk. Okay, so we are paying a lot of attention to environmental reporting right now.
And I think building off that, someone's asking if there's any effort within the industry to prepare for emergencies directly related to weather, and how might this change between European projects and those in the US?
You want to start, Bea?
I think that's really, really interesting. And I mean, obviously, we know hurricane and things like this are very relevant for the US that are maybe less relevant for Europe for now. I mean, we all know about climate change and that we are more facing more severe weather scenarios. And I think that's actually a very good point to also train for this, because if you have a weather window closing or opening, that's really an emergency as well. I'm not sure about, I know with the exercise Sancho they have actually lightning and a thunderstorm within the exercise, but obviously wasn't planned. I'm not sure how you can actually put it into a drill because it's quite unpredictable to plan for. But yeah, that would be a really good scenario.
Yeah, and I think that some of the weather conditions that we are facing now in the US, in Europe, especially in the north area, we will find them in the US, but we will find other weather conditions or sea conditions that are not commonly presented in Europe. So that's another interesting point of like a difference from the European market and the US. And of course, we will make sure that we pay attention to that point as well.
But also working in extremely hot conditions, cold conditions is a topic as well. We look into it and to see what's the effect on PPE, and again wearing PPE on the work safety. So definitely a topic.
And I think this last one, and thank you both for that, this last one will be our final question. And they're asking, Deb is asking if you're seeing greater attention by US developers to become more attentive to marine life and environmental impacts. And if so, how can the US be more sensitive to nature's needs?
Yeah, well, I think that that question is aligned with the last two questions that we have answered. I see a lot of engagement in the US, not only talking about environmental, but like when talking about risk, about programs, leadership, communication, I see a high degree of involvement and engagement in that country. Maybe because it's a new market and everybody's being really careful, trying to learn from other industry, and also because this market is growing so much and so fast that we are kind of little scared, you know, so being prepared for what is happening, you know. So talking about environmental or safety risk, things that are happening or will happen. So we are all very conscious of what is coming and getting ready to face that that huge market that is being developed so fast.
And I think, again, what is really key, and Elena, I hope you agree, is also sharing data, because obviously in the development phase for offshore wind, so much data is collected in the site, in the area. And I think it's a good thing that there are groups looking into the environmental impact, and it's a very necessary thing. It's great that it creates such awareness, but also to work together, to collaborate with industry and these kind of groups to share the data. I think it's a great opportunity to learn and to monitor, and
Yes.
like Elena says, everybody is very interested in seeing how it develops. And I think with sharing and collaboration, you can do a great thing in this area.
And not only the numbers, but what is behind those numbers, what happened, why that happened, why it's being repeated, why this. So we are learning a lot from that, and from the work that is done by the G+, putting all the data together, analyzing it, finding the reasons behind those accidents, and working on the programs in order to avoid those accidents being repeated.
Great. Well, I want to extend another thank you to both Bea and Elena for joining us today and sharing all of this. This has been really, really enlightening. Michael, do you mind if we put up the closing slide? And I want to thank all of the attendees. Thank you for joining us for this Learning from the Experts webinar. A reminder that the webinar recording and presentation slides will be available at nyserda.ny.gov/OSW, that's offshore wind, webinar series. Our next webinar in this series is on Wednesday, September 21st. Dr. Gregory Poulos with Archvera Renewables will be speaking about recent developments with offshore wind flow modeling. And you can register for future webinars through our events page at wind.ny.gov. And I believe we just dropped a link in the chat for our 1-year anniversary survey. So if you haven't yet, please take a moment if you can. Your feedback helps to inform future topics and us better understand opportunities for series involvement. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that. And as always, if you have requests for future topics or that you would like to hear in the series, you can also email us at offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov. So thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.